It's Wednesday, February 12, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Granthermes. Today on the show, Elon Musk gives his first presidential press conference from the Oval Office. But first, we have just a little bit of some breaking news to talk about here. So as I'm recording this, the Senate just confirmed Tulsi Gabbard to be the new Director of National Intelligence. Gabbard is the former Democratic representative from Hawaii, turned not Democrat, but not exactly Republican, but also a Russian and dictator sympathizer. She had one of the more contentious confirmation hearings with more than a few senators calling out that specific sympathy, her parroting of Russian policy views, which we've learned is shaped largely by her steady diet of Russian propaganda. According to ex-staffers, she would routinely watch, read, and share articles from the outlet called Russia Today, or RT, which has long been classified by intelligence experts and the U.S. intelligence agencies shall now oversee as blatant Russian propaganda. Now, she holds the view that the U.S. and our allies in Europe have been too hostile to Vladimir Putin, not necessarily to Russia, but Putin himself, and says that it's that hostility that forced Russia to invade Ukraine. She also met with the bloody former dictator, Bashar al-Assad, from Syria on an unofficial trip there, despite the U.S. not having any ties to the country at that point in time. And while she was there, she also met with a Syrian cleric who was plotting to send suicide bombers to the U.S. Now, when she was asked about that plot by U.S. senators, she said she didn't know, except we do know that an email account, at least registered and associated with her, knew and responded about knowing about this plot. She also refused in that hearing to say whether Edward Snowden, the man who exposed a U.S. government surveillance program of Americans, along with several other national secrets, but then fled to Russia, a traitor. That was a big sticking point for a lot of Republican senators, but she was still confirmed 52-48. Now, the only Republican senator to not vote for her was Senator Mitch McConnell, the former Senate Majority Leader and head, ostensibly, of the entire Republican Party in Congress. He said she failed to demonstrate that she is prepared to assume the tremendous national trust of being the DNI, and said confirming her was an unnecessary risk, and rounded this entire thing off by saying the nation should not have to worry that the intelligence assessments the president receives are tainted by a national director of intelligence with a history of alarming lapses in judgment. But not a single other Republican agreed with McConnell, so Tulsi Gabbard now has the keys to the intelligence kingdom. And speaking of keys to the kingdom, that's getting us here to Elon Musk. He gave his first press conference from the Oval Office, and it was his first one since becoming president. Since Trump became president. It was a press conference so Trump could announce that he was ordering that more power be given over to the not real Department of Government Efficiency. Trump's new executive order gives Musk the power to oversee hiring and firing of pretty much all government employees, forces every government agency to consult with Musk and his 6 other just barely college-age employees about every single new employee, and says they can't hire anyone without Doge's input. Which, for starters here, even if they end up cutting the federal workforce in half, which is seemingly like what they want to do, without cratering the country, that's still 1 million people that these guys will need to review. It would grind the government to a halt, using AI or not. And all these things that the government does, from law enforcement to the military to Social Security to medical grants to student loans to food stamp benefits, would all be massively disrupted. It's hard to understate just how wild of a thing it is for Trump to centralize what is normally power under his executive agencies to an outside-ish group of people who are working as government-employed quasi-consultants. And even more bizarre is that this press conference happened in the Oval Office. And I'm going to set the scene here a bit. So Trump is sitting behind the Resolute desk, which is the name for the president's desk, and is handed this executive order. Nothing really strange there. What is strange is that Musk is standing next to him, standing to the side, but still behind the president's desk in an all-black Make America Great Again hat, although not the one he wore to the Madison Square Garden rally that had the very famous font that was made famous by Nazis on it. This one was the regular MAGA font, but then also had Trump's signature in gold on the brim. He was also in a T-shirt, jeans, belt buckle, and a black coat, like he just blew in from the outside like Kramer from Seinfeld. He also had one of his kids with him who was named X-a12, which I'm not going to pick on a 5-year-old or whatever, although there, speaking of picking, is an objectively funny photo of this kid standing next to Donald Trump at the Resolute desk, picking his nose, the kid, not Trump. But I point this out to say it was just weird that one of Musk's 11 kids is there for this. It's weird that Musk named his kid X because he has an obsession with the letter, but more importantly, Little X, as he's called, interrupted both Musk and Trump several times and then distractingly played around while Musk was talking about things that, as he kept saying at a high level, were about preserving democracy. At one point, Musk is asking questions and this kid is on his shoulders, again, in the Oval Office. And Trump was visibly annoyed by this, but at no point did he appear to have any power to tell Musk to grab his son or hand him off to a staffer just for the press conference portion of this, which I think is the point of mentioning at all that Little X was there. Anyway, Trump did very little talking through the course of this nearly 40-ish minute press conference. It was a lot of Trump looking to the side at Musk while Musk answered questions. Occasionally, Trump would interject, but only to defer to Musk immediately again. Trump looked, at best, disinterested while Musk was talking, and more often like he was just disassociating. Now, this could have been a press conference after the signing of the executive order in the briefing room where things like this normally take place. The Oval Office and the messages that come from it carry a certain weight. It's reserved for the president, and especially where the Resolute desk is involved, it's reserved almost exclusively for the president to transmit these messages. The rest of the Oval Office is frequently used for meetings with foreign dignitaries, and to have Musk standing there speaking about remaking the vision for America or for the federal government while the president of the United States zones out was a striking picture and frankly really telling about where presidential power has been seated at this current moment. Now, let's get to what Musk was talking about. It was a combination of tech bro, corporate speak, and frankly, just a lot of bullshitting. Here's how Musk led off.
If there's not a good feedback loop from the people to the government, and if you have rule of the bureaucrat, if the bureaucracy is in charge, and then what meaning does democracy actually have? If the people cannot vote and have their will be decided by their elected representatives in the form of the president and the Senate and the House, then we don't live in a democracy, we live in a bureaucracy. So it's incredibly important that we close that feedback loop, we fix that feedback loop, and that the public's elected representatives, the president, the House, and the Senate, decide what happens, as opposed to a large, unelected.
So, first of all, that corporate tech speak about a feedback loop or closing it or fixing it is just kind of nonsense. Musk is just padding his stats here by trying to make this sound more important than it is. Also, I have no idea what he means by the fact that people didn't vote. We did vote. In fact, Musk contradicts himself later by saying that Trump was given a mandate to do this stuff, though that's, like I've said before, pretty questionable at this point. Trump didn't win a majority of the vote, and he didn't have an overwhelming landslide in the Electoral College compared to past presidents, but Musk's point here is that the government runs without the input of the people, capital P, which simply isn't true. We vote on members of Congress and senators who are given oversight of the government and the power to change and write laws. Who we didn't vote for was unelected bureaucrats like Elon Musk and his team. But the irony of that seems to be lost on Elon Musk here. Instead, he went on to talk about the national debt.
Got to fix. And we've also got to address the deficit. So we've got a $2 trillion deficit. And if we don't do something about this deficit, the country's going bankrupt. I mean, it's really astounding that the interest payments alone on the national debt exceed the Defense Department budget, which is shocking because we spend a lot of money on defense. But if that just keeps going, we're essentially going to bankrupt the country. So what I really want to say is, like, it's not optional for us to reduce the federal expenses. It's essential. It's essential for America to remain solvent as a country, and it's essential for America to have the resources necessary to provide things to its citizens and not simply be servicing.
So Musk actually confuses the deficit and the debt there. The deficit is the money in versus out every year in the entire American economy. That is around $2 trillion. He's right about that. The national debt is a lot higher. It's about $36 trillion. But as I've said a lot on this show and a lot in other reporting, no one is really concerned about the size of those numbers except for people who don't really understand them. So would we like to have a smaller deficit? Yeah. Are we going to be able to do what Musk wants, which is to cut that in half without hurting a lot of people? No. And normally, people don't want to hurt other people. Are there a lot of ways to reduce the deficit? Sure. And I think that most people want to make sure that American money is being spent properly and going to things that are worthwhile. But what Musk is doing right now isn't actually doing any of that, which I'll get to a little later. The national debt, on the other hand, is the total amount of money that we have borrowed from the global market. Now, again, no one who understands how these things really work is at all concerned about these numbers. Not really. No one is worried that the U.S., especially when it comes to the debt, won't be able to pay back our debts in the long run as long as Congress doesn't default on it, which we very well might do come March. That's a later episode. But back to the deficit, it is big, and I'm not going to downplay that, but economists agree that the U.S., despite the deficit and despite the national debt, is still the safest place to put our money if you're an investment firm or someone with a lot of money from the U.S. government, say Elon Musk, which is more than likely why Elon Musk is so concerned about these things, because if interest rates change, if the deficit really balloons under Donald Trump or the national debt does like it did during his last administration, Elon Musk's money from the federal government could be worth less, meaning his companies could be worth less, meaning he would be worth less. Now, the irony in this, again, is that there are real worries from economists that Elon Musk and his crew monkeying around inside federal departments could actually harm the economy. Or, as the Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz put it, Musk would make most Americans' lives poorer, harder, and shorter. So, moving on from there, Musk went on to say a bunch of things that he didn't back up with evidence or were just flat-out lies. And I'm going to play a few here. Just know that if you're listening to this, these have been cut for time because he speaks in circles and tries to make some jokes here and there with all the charisma of an open jar of mustard. But here it is.
We do find it sort of rather odd that there are quite a few people in the bureaucracy who have ostensibly a salary of a few $100,000, but somehow manage to accrue tens of millions of dollars in net worth while they are in that position, which is what happened at USAID. We're just curious as to where it came from. If you look at say Treasury, for example. Basic controls that should be in place, that are in place in any company, such as making sure that any given payment has a payment categorization code, that there is a comment field that describes the payment, and that if a payment is on the do not pay list, that you don't actually pay it. None of those things are true currently. Crazy things like just cursory examination of Social Security, and we've got people in there that are 150 years old. Now, do you know anyone who's 150? I don't. Okay. They should be on the Guinness Book of World Records. They're missing out.
Okay, let's take these one by one. First, the head of USAID. So he's talking about Samantha Power. Now, Musk appears to be getting this $30 million number from a very shady anti-Democrat website called Inside Biden's Basement. The website says its goal is to lock out Biden administration employees from getting jobs in the private sector by going through their finances. So it's a reason to mislead. about their finances. Now, Samantha Power is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and documentarian, a founding member of the Center for Human Rights at Harvard, and a former U.S. ambassador to the UN, and her salary was about $225,000 a year as the head of USAID. Now, all of this money that Musk is talking about is likely coming from financial disclosures that Power had to submit when she was appointed to be head of USAID. So that's money that she's already made and she's already worth from her past. And that's things like investments, that's things like speaking fees, that's things from her books and from her time working at Harvard, that's accrued money. So it's not that she's mysteriously gained money while working for USAID, she just had money other places. And for what it's worth, Musk is engaging in some real hypocrisy here again because he doesn't disclose his own finances to be in the position that he's currently in, again, something I will come to a little bit later. The second thing here is the Treasury. So this is something that Musk didn't offer any evidence for, and it's practically impossible to check. This is one of those things that, without evidence, we should have trouble believing or taking it at face value because Musk has a vested interest in these things being true because he's running this Department of Government Efficiency. So he could very easily be playing it fast and loose with the truth here, but it's also just as likely that he or his people don't understand the system the Treasury has put in place in order for payments to go out on time. Also, the do not pay list is one of these things where the government follows a sort of innocent until proven guilty model of payments, which is to say payments can still go out until it's proven that they shouldn't. That way, someone who wrongly ends up on a do not pay list doesn't get cut off. It's the same principle that sometimes in our justice system, guilty people go free so that we don't lock innocent ones up, at least in principle. Now, I will say the Government Accountability Office did find last June that the Treasury still needed some better controls on things like audits and some of its cash payments, but those weren't things that Musk found. They were actually found under the Biden administration and had been found under previous administrations, and the GAO said that the Treasury was actively working to fix those problems until, that is, Musk got in there and started tampering with things. Finally, let's talk about this claim that there are people collecting Social Security who are 150 years old. This is completely false. There is no evidence of this as done by multiple fact-checking organizations and the list that I have been able to look at myself, which are becoming harder and harder to find as DOJ begins wiping federal archives. Now, there have been reports done by offices of inspectors general in the past that found somewhere in the neighborhood of 19 million people in the U.S. were born before or in 1920 who didn't have death records on file, and about 44,000 of those were receiving Social Security checks. But on the other hand, a Pew Research study found that there are more than 101,000 Americans over the age of 100, most of whom are collecting Social Security benefits right now. And that number, by the way, of centenarians is expected to quadruple over the next 30 years, so maybe using a 100-year-old scope might actually be too small. But when it comes to Social Security payments and death records, if there is one thing that we learned from COVID, it is that we are not good in this country at keeping track of who dies and when they die. Those are things done at the local and state level, not the federal level, and the process for that is never easy, nor is it ever streamlined. On top of that, Social Security fraud is just way more common to be an accident or a misunderstanding. Something like a spouse not knowing that they're still collecting their dead spouse's check, or they think that they're still entitled to it because they're married, or money is going out to somebody with the same name at that same address, like a junior. And then, yes, there are the cases where it's legitimate fraud, and those people are frequently caught. If you don't believe me, just hop onto any U.S. attorney's website and see in their press releases how often they actually catch these people. That's not money that's unaccounted for once they're caught. That's money that the government has found. But the thing is that Musk and company see all of this, the employee net worths, the payments, the Social Security as fraud, because they don't understand it when the answers to their questions are most often that these things are happening because the U.S. government is so huge. It's larger than any company that's ever existed and can't operate like a company because that's not how governments work. If they pull back their services, people will be hurt. People will die. That's just not the case in private business. At any point in time, you can fold shop, take your ball and go home. The government doesn't get to do that. And making these massive changes to the federal government is like trying to get an oil tanker made of hard plastic or glass to do a U-turn in molasses. It takes a long time, and if it goes too fast, it'll break. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about here is a question from a reporter about transparency from Musk, who, like I've said before, has a lot of conflicts of interest tied up in the government. We're talking tens of billions of dollars, and so far, he's not gone out of his way to divest or distance himself from any interests his companies have, but here's that exchange.
The White House says that you will identify and excuse yourself from any conflicts of interest that you may have. Does that mean that you are, in effect, policing yourself? What are the checks and balances that are in place to ensure that there is accountability and transparency?
Well, we actually are trying to be as transparent as possible. In fact, we post our actions to the Doge handle on X and to the Doge website. So all of our actions are maximally transparent. In fact, I don't think there's been, I don't know of a case where an organization has been more transparent than the Doge organization. So, you know, and the kind of things we're doing are, I think, very, very simple and basic.
Now, to be clear, that's actually the second half of the exchange. The first half, Musk talked in circles and danced around this thing, saying he was as transparent as possible, but it's not an answer to the questions here, neither the first part nor the second part. What he didn't say was that there are any kind of guardrails looking into his own contracts or the agencies that deal directly with him, which so far he's left a lot of those agencies out of his smash and grab spree into the federal government. And for starters, Musk isn't transparent at all. His designation as a special government employee means that he doesn't have to disclose his finances or contracts or conflicts of interest publicly. But somebody who works in Elon Musk's initiative said he was given a pamphlet on government ethics, which I'm sure didn't end up in the trash on the way out the door. And on top of that, all of Doge records and emails or any kind of correspondence has been restructured to fall under the Presidential Records Act, which might not be legal, but it means that as of now, we won't be able to see any of the disclosures, conflicts of interest, or communications of any person working at Doge for the next decade. And again, irony and hypocrisy here, Musk preached that there should be total government transparency. Here he was back in October.
I think the strong bias with respect to government information should be to make it available to the public. Like it should be, let's be as transparent as possible, like fully transparent, unless it's like a massive risk to the country. Like it's like we don't want to give say exact instructions on how to make a nuclear bomb or something like that. But unless there's a genuine risk to the country, all information in the government should be public.
And I know, listening to that, you might think that he'd want to be as open as possible, but he just meant it for other people. Now, he says he's being transparent on X, a site that he owns and has full control of what goes up and what gets taken down. And the account for Doge on this website, whether it's Musk saying it or somebody who's running it, is just saying that they found stuff without providing any evidence. And again, they have an incentive to lie here because they're supposed to be finding things. Now, the White House today, in the press briefing, responded to these allegations that Musk doesn't have any proof. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt waved around a stack of screenshots that she said were of contracts or filings with the federal government. She did not pass them out, as far as I know, and then read some.
As for the actual receipts, we are happy to provide them, and I actually brought some today because all of you know I love to bring the receipts. We have contracts upon contracts that we can send and provide this information to you. Let me be very clear. We are not trying to hide anything. We have been incredibly transparent, and we will continue to be. These are screenshots of contracts that DOJ found across our government. This is a DEI contract, $36,000 for U.S. citizenship and immigration services. That is against the president's policies and his America First agenda. This is a $3.4 million contract, a Council for Inclusive Innovation at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, Department of Commerce, another DEI contract that DOJ identified. I can continue to go through these. Oh, I love this one, $57,000 for climate change in Sri Lanka. What is this doing to continue the interests of the American people? Absolutely nothing.
So that list continues for a little bit, but you'll notice here that we're talking in the scope of the government, almost no money that's going to make a difference. And she's also not talking about fraud. She's talking about things that don't align with Trump's policies, which isn't what Musk is supposed to be looking for, nor, again, is it clear that any of this kind of a thing is legal because Congress says what the money is for, not the president. But bringing this back to this Oval Office press conference, what this was a way for a lot of the president's people and a lot of Musk's fanboys out there to have clips of Musk saying that these things are working and showing that he's in the Oval Office running the show. And from all of these things, that's the takeaway from what happened yesterday afternoon, is that what we saw in this press conference was a American president handing over the authority of the physical office of the president to an unelected, unscrutinized guy who was willing to lie to the American people for his own personal and political gain. Okay, that is it for today's episode. Please rate and review the show, whatever podcast app you listen to. Like and subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications on YouTube. Also, subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got daily articles going up, including my most recent one about Trump might actually think that he'll be a 3-term president. It's bonkers. He keeps talking about it. You'll definitely want to read it. It is for paid subscribers. It's just $5 a month, and you really help this show out by keeping this thing going. And as always, and if you don't want to do that, no sweat, but please share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on X and Bluesky, and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you on Friday.